We are less than a week away from F1 25, and this past weekend I was invited down to the O2 to the Virgin Media gamepad to play an early version of the game focused on specifically the F1 movie APX GP part of the game. That's all it had. We've done a few laps, I've got a preview, I've got some thoughts. Also, I have an interview with F1's creative director Gavin Cooper, my first time ever doing something like this, at the end of the video. So timestamps down below, watch it. It's around 15 minutes and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's focused on my team, but let's talk about the entire experience. I'm going to give my thoughts and opinions in the first part of the video and then let the interview run at the end. So thanks to EA Sports F1, F1 the movie and Virgin Media, we at the EA Creator Network, us creators, were invited down to the O2 for a 2-hour time slot approximately to get an early access preview of the F1 25 game and kind of, get some first thoughts and opinions. Now the way it worked was there was an event, and that event had the actual APX GP car on show. It was the real thing, I can confirm it. Everybody there also will vouch. It was not a show car. You could smell, even around the back of the exhaust, that was the car they used on track at every single race for the film there in person. And to be fair, it was pretty sexy. We all know it's actually an F2 car, which basically has an F1 cosmetic skin, body parts, but it's an F2 base, or skeleton per se. And generally, it ticks all the boxes and looks freaking awesome. Now, that was on show at the entry, just outside of the Virgin Media gamepad, and then we go inside and you basically walk up some stairs and you arrive at a lounge which had 4 rigs set up, all with the F1 25 game with an exclusive early build, very limited, only with the APX GP scenario basically on it. So what this was the first scenario or chapter that you're going to get in the game. So take Breaking Point as an example. You have cutscenes, and then based off those cutscenes, you're going to get challenges set to you in gameplay to try and beat. So the film has a cutscene, or there's a part of the film they show, which I can't show you here for copyright reasons, but they'll show you some context from the film, and then you get loaded into a cutscene or a challenge in the game based off that clip. So in this particular build, this is the very first one you're going to get in the game. I believe this is public to everybody. And then beyond this point, if you want to see more of these, you have to get the Iconic Edition. But basically, this first one goes as follows. They show a bit of film footage, and it's actually Sonny Hayes and Joshua Pierce. Now, Sonny Hayes is, of course, coming out of retirement. At least that's what it seems. And they're at a private test in Silverstone with no fans. And basically, they get into a bit of a verbal, war of words, and Sonny basically says, I'll get within half a second of Joshua Pierce's time. And that's basically setting the challenge or setting the scene for what you're going to see here. So basically, you're going to get 2 laps around Silverstone in the APX GP car to just get acclimatized, get comfortable, and get familiar with the handling, because the car does feel different. More on that in just a second. And once you get those 2 laps and you find your baseline, then you get 1 lap to basically go full attack and send it. Now granted, I only did 1 attempt, literally 3 laps, I did no more, so very small sample size here, very limited feedback, but I actually did my best lap on the second one, not knowing there was going to be a 3rd lap to basically go full push. And I will admit, the car does feel different. It's actually slower than the F1 cars, which is fine. It does feel like in the low speed, it's way more understeery, it struggles, there's no downfalls. In the high speed, it's actually quite fine. I took cops flat out, there's certain corners where you can really give it some beans, but there's other ones where it struggles, like Luffield, Brooklands, the car feels a bit slow. The last chicane, there is those elements where the understeer is criminal. Now, again, 3 laps. If I'd sweat that a bit, I could have probably taken a couple of seconds off. Also, better battery management, better setup. For sure, quicker, but not as quick based off what I've seen compared to the F1 25 cars. Now, that was literally it. That was the whole experience. So 3 laps, and you do your best lap at the end, and that is it. You then finish your last lap, and you get another cutscene, which rolls you onto the next part, right? So, I won't say too much or give too much away or spoil what happens, but yeah, basically it kind of intertwines with the movie. right? And just keeps on rolling. So if you get the Iconic Edition, you'll be able to see more of those chapters down the line. And I certainly will be playing those because actually I didn't half mind them. Anyway, that aside, that was the gameplay aspect. And it doesn't really change much. We still don't really have much to go off. And we're going to see what happens over the next week. And if we do get hands-on, doesn't look like we are. But if we do, stay tuned. Anyway, that's the F125 part of the video. Literally, that was the event. It was actually pretty quick, short, snappy. I linked up with Arav. Shout out to him also for sending some of the footage that you're watching right now with his equipment as well, because I was quite limited. And also big shout out to James Brallan at Cody's or EA, because he also made this next interview you're going to see possible. So shout out to him. But yeah, basically we have an interview here with Gavin Cooper. Now he's the creative director. So to basically give you guys some context and explain what his job entails, he's at the top. So his vision, what he wants the game to be, is what will be. He doesn't actually develop anything, and I was told beforehand, don't ask questions about handling or AI or specific features, because he doesn't actually develop these things. He basically just, tells people, right, you do this, and that's going to be the game. So it's essentially his vision come to life. So I took the opportunity to basically ask questions focused on my team, because that's the big thing this year and what we're going to be jumping headfirst into when the game launches. So yeah, pretty much I had a short window to come up with a few questions, and I kind of topped them up on the fly, and we got mic'd up and jumped in, and this was the final result from that. And it was around a 15-minute interview, and yeah, shout out to Gavin, he was awesome. Actually knew who I was and was a big fan of mine, so thank you very much, mate. I won't play the clip, but I'll save it forever. And yeah, we're going to get into it. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the end once the interview has finished. Gav, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you, man.
Right, so just a few questions. I won't take up too much of your time. First one, what was the thinking behind switching from the driver-owner system in my team in this year's game to now managing the two drivers?
So there's really sort of like a couple of angles from this. So the first one is, just from an authenticity point of view, we know that in the modern sport, playing as, the owner of the team and simultaneously being the lead driver on the team, that's just not authentic. But that's not really the main reason. The main reason was, we wanted to do a big revamp of my team. And that means changing the whole sort of fabric of how all the different features in my team fit together to give players kind of new choices to make. If we're not giving you new choices to make, then why are we even really revamping it? And there was this really rich seam of decision making that we wanted to explore, but we couldn't, because anytime we kind of asked you to make a choice, where you would favour one driver over another, if you identify as one of those drivers, that choice becomes a no-brainer. There's no interesting decision to make there. And so that was kind of why we wanted to move towards you being the owner, trying to manage a pair of drivers. You watch the real sports, especially if you watch like Drive to Survive and things like that. You know just how much drama and interest comes from trying to manage two drivers who each independently have potentially competing concerns. And so it was so that we could expose the player to choices like that. With all the changes we've made to like the R&D system to separate out development this year. If you give, if you only end up heading into a Grand Prix with like one upgrade, who do you give that to? Previously, that wouldn't be an interesting decision. You just give it to yourself. Whereas now you've got to weigh up different things. When you give it to one of those drivers, how's that going to make the pair of drivers feel? How's that going to factor into contract negotiations? When if you want to re-sign one of them for the following season, is it better to kind of like give it to the driver that you intend to take control of that weekend, or is it better to give it to the other one to give them a bit of an edge? Are you looking to kind of like try and push one driver to be as good as possible? You're trying to earn points across the team. There's a whole bunch of interesting things that factor into that decision making that just would never have really been exposed to the player before. So, we know that there's been been kind of pushback from players on I want to drive as myself, and and to a certain extent that's we kind of want to sort of like push the differentiation between the two career modes. The fantasy of being the driver, that's still there. You can still play driver career. Whereas differentiating that from the fantasy of being the team owner and getting to make these really, really fun decisions. And so that was really kind of what drove it.
Personally, I actually quite like a change. I'm on board with it. I'm literally doing a my team on F124 right now, and I'm trying to push Ollie Behrman, who's my teammate, to try and get a point. And I wish I could control him to try and give me a hand in the Constructors' Championship, and I can't do it. So, yeah, I personally, I think that's quite a good idea. So I'll go to the next one, still with my team, regarding the driver reputation, which was last year's big overhaul for F124 driver career. Now we have fan rating this year, which has been massively revamped. I personally found after one season last year on driver career, you kind of played through everything that was new, and it was hard to kind of find more novelty. Do you think this year it's been a bit more expanded upon various seasons? So you're going to get a bit more depth, a bit more dynamic experience throughout season 2, 3, a bit more?
Yeah, I think so. I think the fan rating system, but also the facility improvement system is deliberately built so that you can't top out all of your top out your team HQ in just a single season. That's something you're going to be able to make good progress in your first season, but it is going to slow down beyond that point. So there should still be sort of plenty of decision making to happen sort of season 2 onwards.
So I just touched on it a second ago, so I'll get this one out of the way. Obviously, driver career was a big thing last year, revamp. Has there been any change based on feedback from the past game just to tweak it for this year's game, or are you just kind of setting it for a big thing maybe for next year or onwards?
So this year the focus has been very much on my team. We kind of really needed to kind of put all of our emphasis on trying to sort of make that as big a change as possible. So driver career, obviously sort of still inheriting a number of the improvements that we're making across both career modes. So things like the improvements to driver icons, for example, the way that I think driver career especially kind of benefits from that. I mean, previously you couldn't really have driver icons in driver career unless you were playing as one yourself. But now you can actually get the AI to, you can give the AI the option of signing those, and end up going up against those kind of famous faces. I think it's nice to get some more use out of that. Obviously it benefits from, being able to put the reverse tracks into the calendar from season 2 onwards. Obviously, all the improvements we've made to handling and the AI as well. So it inherits a lot of improvements, but no, we've not really gone back to the things that are specific to driver career this year. We wanted to focus on my team.
Okay, so I've got one here. So you hinted at icons. There's been a bit of a refresh this year. Some of the ones that were in the game in the past have been taken away. We've now got F3 added in. So essentially, the pool of drivers is the same, but different faces. Is this maybe a change of direction, or do you want to just test the waters with the F3 thing? There were past icons of, for example, let's say Montoya or ones on James Hunt. Will they return? What's the situation with that? What's the focus or the idea with that?
I think our goal with the driver icons is to keep the sort of driver icon market kind of fresh. We don't want it to be stale. We want it to be sort of new ones each year. Obviously, we like mining the historical drivers, and that's something a lot of people really enjoy. We're always going to be subject to an extent to the constraints of kind of like what we can do in terms of licensing. But I think really, I think exploring the F3 drivers was something we hadn't done before. I think that kind of like tied into the idea of sort of like starting out your my team, sort of signing some sort of rookie drivers. They were kind of a nice fit for that. It was an opportunity to try something new, really, and see how players react to that.
And do you think it's possible that in the future, sometime we may see, for example, they've recently left Magnussen, Vettel? Could they come back? They've been in the game recently. Could it be reused as an asset, or is that not really something that's possible right now?
It's something we will continue to kind of consider in the background. Again, it really comes down to licensing opportunities and kind of where we want to sort of focus. Focus our efforts essentially. So it could happen, but I can't give you any sort of concrete.
Reason I mention it is because obviously now we've changed the focus from driver owner to team manager. You lose or gain, depending on how you look at it, 50% of the experience. So if you're now managing 2 drivers, you would want a deeper pool of selections possible. That's the thinking behind that question.
I think that's fair. And I think that's something as we look to sort of see how players react to sort of 25 when it comes out in a couple of weeks. I think that's sort of one of the things we'll be looking at to help inform sort of where we push our efforts.
Obviously, decal editor this year, big change. Personally, quite excited about that one. I think people got a bit carried away. Possibly that's like a livery editor. I think there's a reason it's a decal editor. There's a fine line there. But even still, big change, and potentially also look in the future. Could it even be scaled up more? Could we be looking at absolute just freedom of expression, everyone's car, or do we still have some limitations in the way?
So depending on where we go future, again, it comes we want to see what people actually do with the decal editor when it comes out. I'm quite excited to see what people come up with. It's actually been one of the things I've had a lot of fun with. during development in terms of sort of playing around with it, and we've had little competitions within the studio to come up with
really?
the liveries for kind of like the AI drivers in F1 World, and the sort of, default player configs and stuff. So yeah, no, it's an area we're really, really interested in looking at. I think where we go in the future, I think a full livery editor probably to me wouldn't be as high a priority as potentially looking at sort of helmet customization, suit customization. But that's subjective. That's very much me sort of like just thinking on what we might do in the future rather than any kind of like concrete plan at this point. I think we kind of we'll listen to players, see where they think the next best gains would come from, and be informed by that really.
Okay, what's the biggest feature from my team this year? The one thing that you would say this is going to transform the experience, and it's kind of a two-part question because I've got one here about what are you most proud about. So maybe it's the same thing, same answer, or maybe, but the one thing that you would say, yeah, this for me is the biggest change.
So it's a really tricky question to answer because the thing about my team is it's not really just one thing. It's the fabric of the experience. It's how all the systems sort of interact with one another that generates all that kind of interesting decision space for the player to explore. So out of my team specifically, I think one of the things I think I'm probably the most happy with is the new facility improvement system.
Right.
So if you remember the facility upgrades from the old My Team, they were quite simplistic. And the ones that were for the different departments of R&D were pretty much the exact same thing, just copy pasted 4 times.
We're talking about the 3-tier level 1, level 2, level 3 each thing. Right?
Exactly. So it's quite simplistic. We've made them. That's probably one of the areas that sort of like changed the most is the facility improvement system. So it's now split between kind of the 3 facilities, so engineering, personal, corporates. But the range of kind of different improvements that you can explore is much bigger, much more varied than it was before. And the nice thing about that is it acts as kind of like a bit of a hub. It sort of ties into ultimately all these improvements tie into all the other systems that are throughout the My Team experience. You can use this to kind of push yourself in a direction where you're better at signing drivers. You're better at sort of like generating counter offers when it comes time to negotiate a contract. They're more likely to listen to you. You can go in that direction, or do you want to focus more on making more money and just kind of brute force your way through and just pay people more money because you can afford to because you're a richer team? How do you balance those against the needs of kind of the engineering facility and kind of pushing your upgrade progress for the car? Yeah. It's a place where you kind of have to sort of balance all of those sort of different areas, and I think it gives you a really good foundation for doing that.
So you just mentioned regarding driver transfers, quick little touch on that topic. We now have a revised system this year, of course, with now you have to actually hire and fire 2 drivers, and that also links into fan rating, everything. Pairing that with the revised contract system they have this year, does it give you a more dynamic experience when signing, hiring drivers? For example, in the past, it would sometimes be an auction, but that would kind of be the only experience you really get. Is there a bit more to it? Is a bit more layered this year?
I feel it is. I mean, obviously, it's subjective. So we're looking forward to see how players feel in a couple of weeks. But I mean, there's not kind of like that that sort of real time gameplay bits of kind of like the auction stuff, but it's played out over time. So basically, when the contract window opens, you're deciding sort of like when you've been working over the course of the season to kind of reach out and build relationships with drivers and kind of figure out, you go through various meetings with them to figure out, what their requirements are, try and build up your relationship with them so that you can get better terms with them. How long you leave it, before you actually sort of send them out a contract.
Right.
What kind of contract you send out? Do you send some, there's like a default contract, but if you want to sort of dig into it and actually propose a counter offer that focuses on, that gets you something more in terms of what you want, but maybe gives up sort of like in a different area. Those are the kinds of choices you can make. But when you send that out, it's kind of up to you. The longer you leave it, the more pressure the drivers are under to sort of, to find a seat for the following season. And so you might be able to get better terms the later you go. But the later you go, the more time an AI team has to potentially reach out and snatch them out from under you. So, I'd say it doesn't have that kind of, like I say, that real time, I'm in an auction and I'm pressing buttons now and then it all falls out of that.
Perfect.
it takes place over a longer period of time, but it does have all of those other interactions that make it an interesting thing to really think about. Like, how do I want to play this out?
So you're not under the gun to make a decision right there and then. You can bleed it over a couple of race weekends. If need be.
Yeah.
Because a few times I've run out of funds before, and I've forgot about the contract window, and suddenly I've had to replace my driver with an F2 driver or whatever I can afford. So that is a changing experience. Last one, now that you've mentioned it, and I also had a note here. This year, big thing is in the game we have the cost cap. That's now an element of the game. And I'm wondering, this is me kind of linking it to last year's game, with the chips we would have between seasons. Is that a thing in this game in my team?
It's not in my team. It's something that we considered, but ultimately we had to kind of focus on the things that we thought were going to have the greatest impact for my team. It's something I would consider for the future. If we were to go back and make more changes to my team, I would be interested in re-examining that decision, because I think the nice thing about it is it has the potential to sort of tie into a lot more systems in my team. Like you could, for example, have a hiring freeze. Your workforce is going to tick up a lot more slowly this year because there's the job market's defunct or something. So I think we could do something with it. It's just we can do. Lee's off fond of saying, we can do anything, but we can't do everything, and that was one of the things that had to hit the cutting room floor, unfortunately. So no, it's a good idea, and it's what I would look at in the future.
Yeah, I just think it's another way of adding that kind of freshness in between seasons. And also it kind of worked last year, so I thought of expand it on the My Team profile. But that's my question. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to playing the game next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, man.
Cheers. Hopefully the audio was okay. I tried to refine it a little bit to kind of boost it, and there is a bit of clipping in that as well. It's not perfect, but first time doing it, it wasn't really confirmed if it was going to happen or not. So a lot of kind of on the fly calls, but it worked out. We got a decent interview. I think the audio is pretty clear. You can kind of understand what I'm asking, what Gavin's saying. And generally, I thought it was actually quite productive. We did get some small little insiders there, some little answers and some things where, we're opening the gap. I think I made some good suggestions regarding increasing the amount of icons and driver selections we have. He hinted at, helmet editor down the line, also suit, gloves editor as well, not just a decal editor. And generally speaking, potential features on the way, like adding the kind of in-between season, challenges or the chips, like an F124 driver career, to add some more depth to my team, amongst other things we discussed. And generally speaking, I am excited for my team this year. I think it's going to be fine. I think we're going to have a decent couple of seasons. I just hope, it all works out okay in the end. But ultimately, as we've said since day one, the jury's still out regarding handling and AI. Handling, I'm less concerned about. At this point, I'm more concerned about the AI, because based off the beta, feedback, what we're hearing, what people are saying, the handling seems to be somewhere between F123, F124, more leaning towards 23, but, we're still going to find out exactly to what extent that's the case. So yeah, I want your thoughts down below, guys, in the comments. Did you enjoy the video? Like, subscribe, massively helps out the channel, guys. F125 is just around the corner, less than a week away, so stay tuned for the latest breaking news. And yeah, as always, a massive shout out to the channel members for making this possible. All you guys that watch as well, massive thank you to all of you for making this possible, guys. This wouldn't happen without your support. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Check out 2 videos on screen, and I'll see you next time. Take care, and let's go back from me. Adios.